Go ahead, take a look at the money in your wallet. I mean, really look at it. It's just paper, right? A little bit of ink. And yet, this simple piece of paper pretty much dictates your entire life: what you eat, where you live, what you can and can't do. So, how? How can something so, flimsy have that much power over everything?
Well, that is exactly the mystery we're going to unravel today. We're diving deep into how we, as a planet, all just kind of agree that these pieces of paper are worth something. It's a wild story. Let's get into it. So, we have to start with what some people call the paper paradox. And it's this kind of unsettling idea that a dollar bill has no real value on its own. It's not backed by a giant pile of gold in a vault anymore. Nope. Its worth comes from something way more abstract and honestly a lot more fragile.
I mean, really think about that for a second. You trade hours of your actual life, your work, your time, your energy for these pieces of paper, and then you turn around and a grocer gives you real actual food for that same paper? How does that even work? Why do we all just go along with this massive collective game of make-believe?
Well, the short answer, and this is the big idea we're going to keep coming back to, is belief. Or maybe a better word is trust. The entire global financial system, the whole shebang, is built on this shared confidence that if you accept this paper today, someone else will accept it from you tomorrow. But to really get how we ended up in a system based on pure belief, we got to rewind the clock. We need to go back to a time before money, a time of direct trade, and see why that old way of doing things was just, well, doomed to fail. Okay, so imagine you're a chicken farmer. You've got tons of chickens, but your tractor is broken. You go to the mechanic and you say, "Hey, I'll give you some chickens to fix my tractor." But she says, "I don't need chickens, I need bread." So you go to the baker, but he needs new shoes. You see the problem, right? It's this messy web called the coincidence of wants, and it basically makes trade almost impossible. The whole system just grinds to a halt. So yeah, pretty clearly, society needed a middleman, something that everyone, no matter what they did, would agree has value. That way, you could just trade your chickens for that thing and then trade that thing for whatever you actually wanted. Simple.
And for centuries, that something was gold. And it made a lot of sense, right? First off, it's rare. You can't just whip up a batch of gold in your kitchen, which keeps the supply limited. Second, it's super durable. It doesn't rot like a chicken or rust away. And finally, over time, it just became universally trusted.
And this quote right here, it just hits the nail on the head. Even with gold, the value wasn't really in the metal itself. The value came from the shared collective belief that other people would want it. It basically became a physical symbol of trust. But let's be honest, carrying around heavy chunks of gold is a pain. It's risky. So this led to the next and maybe the most radical step in this whole story, the government's great big gamble on paper. Now, at first, governments just issued paper notes that were basically IOUs, receipts for gold. This was the gold standard. You could literally take your paper dollar to a bank and swap it for a tiny bit of actual gold. It made money convenient, but it was still tied to something real. But then, governments had a huge realization, maybe a dangerous one. They realized they didn't need the gold at all. They could just create value out of thin air. And that switch from gold-backed notes to pure paper money, what we call fiat money, it changed everything. With gold, the value was tied to a rare physical thing. But with fiat money, the value is tied to a promise from an institution, the government. Our trust had to shift from a shiny object to the authority that was printing the paper. Which, of course, brings us right back to the million-dollar question, or I guess the $1 question. If this paper isn't a claim on a chunk of gold, if it's just ink on a page, what gives it any value? What's the secret sauce that stops the whole thing from collapsing?
Well, it turns out the answer lies in three absolutely essential pillars. These are the foundations that hold up our entire modern money system and hopefully keep it from all falling down. Pillar number one, and it's the big one, is just trust. It's a network effect, right? Money has value simply because we all believe it has value. You accept a dollar for your work because you're totally confident you can go and buy coffee with that same dollar. It's this powerful, self-fulfilling prophecy we're all a part of. Okay, pillar number two, government authority. Now, the government does a couple of really clever things here. First, it calls its money legal tender, which just means, by law, people have to accept it to pay off debts. But here's the real kicker. The government demands that you pay your taxes in that currency. And because every single person in business has to get their hands on dollars to pay taxes, it creates this permanent, built-in demand for the money. That gives it a solid floor of value. And that brings us to pillar number 3, controlled supply. This is so key. Just like gold, money has to be scarce to be valuable. If they just printed trillions of dollars, it would become worthless. So you have a central bank, like the Federal Reserve in the US, that acts like a gatekeeper, carefully managing how much money gets created to try and keep its value stable. So you put those 3 pillars together, trust, authority, and a controlled supply, and you get the money we use every day. But it's so important to remember that this entire structure, at its very core, is a story. It's a story that we all agree to tell ourselves and, more importantly, to believe. And that, of course, raises a pretty scary question. What happens when people stop believing in the story? What happens when trust in the government disappears, or when the supply just spirals completely out of control? Well, the value of that money can absolutely crash. That's what hyperinflation is. And history has shown us, again and again, that when that trust shatters, the collapse is incredibly fast and incredibly brutal. The moment that shared belief vanishes, that paper money goes right back to being what it physically is, just worthless paper. Which leads us to our final and maybe most important point. Money itself isn't wealth. The houses, the food, the technology, the skills people have, that's the real wealth. Money is just the clever accounting system we invented to decide who gets all that stuff. At the end of the day, money is a technology. It's a social tool. It's built on a shared story that allows billions of us to trade our time and our talents for the real things that we actually need and want in life. And that leaves us with one last, kind of mind-bending thought. For hundreds of years, our shared story about value has been about gold, and then about government-backed paper. But if money really is just a story, what happens when we start telling a new one?